We believe we're self-sufficient. Jesus says that is not enough. You must be born again.
Welcome to the La Casa de Cristo Sermoncast. We invite you to check out our website, lacasadecristo.com, for everything going on at the church. Also, follow us on social media under the username La Casa Family. Now, let's get into the sermon.
Nick was a resident of North Scottsdale and a very successful individual. Nick lived in a 5-bedroom home with an Olympic-sized swimming pool. He had just purchased his second Mercedes, and he had just recently been honored by the Scottsdale Chamber of Commerce with their Person of the Year award. He served on the governing board of a synagogue, and he seemed to have it all. But something kept Nick up at night, and he couldn't quite place his finger upon it until he heard about a visiting preacher who was coming to downtown Phoenix and decided that he would go listen to him. And after the presentation, late at night, when no one else would see, not anyone that he might run into because he didn't want to appear weak or in need of anything, he approached the preacher and said, "Jesus, what do I need?" And Jesus said, "You must be born again." Whether it's modern day Nick in Scottsdale or ancient Nicodemus in Palestine, the same is true for each and every one of us, because we are all Nicodemus. We are all Nicodemus. Are you born again? Many times we hear those words and there's a very narrow definition to them, defined by certain segments of Christianity. That you have to say something in a certain way, or you have to do something in a certain way, or there's a certain formula that you have to experience in baptism, or the amount of water that's used in baptism or not. But that's not what it means to be born again at all, because those are human definitions that have been placed upon that term. What we hear are powerful words in this gospel today, a gospel that ends with the famous passage of John 3:16 and 17, but one that is so profound in the encounter that Nicodemus has with Jesus, because Nicodemus is you and Nicodemus is me. Words are powerful. I learned that in my first parish. I was by myself developing a new church, knocking on doors, and we were having a weekly Bible study that I was leading, and I was the only person there. There was no staff. And I woke up that Wednesday morning and I had a fever and 102 temperature and just felt lousy with the flu. So back in the days before texts and emails and everything else, I had to go to the place where we were meeting and put a sign up on the door that the class was canceled. So I did that, and then on Sunday, as people were coming into church, they said, "Oh, Pastor," they said, "that sign you put up was so funny. That was so hilarious." And I didn't understand what they meant, because I was half delirious anyway. And it turns out that, I had been teaching a class on the Old Testament prophets, a class on prophecy, and what I had written on the sign was, "Due to unforeseen circumstances, the class on prophecy has been canceled today." Think about it. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the class on prophecy has been canceled. Words are powerful. So what do we know about being born again in this passage? What does Jesus tell us? You see, the sad truth is Nicodemus had it pretty good. Just like Nick in Scottsdale had it pretty good. He didn't think he needed God at all, at least not in the way that God wanted to communicate to him. He believed that God was a God of rules and regulations. God was a God of duties and law. But instead what Jesus says is you have to be born again, because the Spirit of God is like the wind, and the wind blows where it will. It comes from north, south, east, and west, and so it is with God's Holy Spirit. So as we explore this morning, I think part of the challenge that I have as the preacher is very challenging in this message, because the reality is what you're wanting out of this sermon is 2 or 3 steps so that you can understand how the Holy Spirit can operate in your life. And I simply can't do that, because it's not about facts. And your experience is not my experience. It is about the Spirit that blows where it will. And here's the thing. Like Nicodemus, we want to define it, and then we don't want to change. We believe we're self-sufficient. If only we tinker a little bit here or there with our lives, we tinker with our assets, or we tinker with our families, or we tinker with relationships, or we tinker with our job, and we just make these adjustments here or there, then everything will be fine. Jesus says that is not enough. You must be born again. So what really does that mean? I can only give you an analogy this morning that may be helpful. You see, many Christians around the world, in the third world, in Latin America and Africa and Asia, can't understand Christianity in our country because we believe it's all about facts and propositions. It's all about understanding God completely and getting answers to everything. It's all about the first two parts of the Trinity, God the Father and God the Son. But what our brothers and sisters in the third world teach us is the experience of the Holy Spirit in our lives. And the analogy I want to give to you is this. If you've ever had a surgery and gone under anesthesia, or you take a daily or weekly prescription for something, let's say it's high blood pressure or maybe low thyroid or whatever the case may be, you know you take that anesthesia, you know you take that medicine, you know you take that medicine for pain after surgery, but 99.9% of us could not describe what that medicine does in our body scientifically. Unless we're a doctor or a scientist, we can't explain how that medicine enters our body by taking that pill or that shot and then coursing through our blood and affecting what it needs to affect to give us what we need. We simply accept the cure. And yet, when it comes to our spiritual lives, we want every question answered in this book. We think it should all make sense to us. We look at the facts regarding God and we debate the nature of God and good and evil. We look at Jesus Christ and we try to understand him in our lives. But when it comes to the Holy Spirit, we have to be willing to let go and change. That's what both Nick and Nicodemus were refusing to do. And that's what you refuse to do, and I often refuse to do in my life. Because we believe if we just adjust it a little bit here and there, it's all going to be better. And Jesus says that is not enough. You must be born again. All you have to do is pray and say this: God, help me. God, let your Spirit enter my life. That's all you need. And if even that is hard, if you're struggling right now with health or grief or a work problem or a family problem, if even that is hard, Paul gives us the answer. He says, when we can't speak, the Holy Spirit intercedes for us with sighs and groans too deep to understand. That God will be our advocate. But we have to accept the cure. We aren't going to have all the answers. So why are we always debating? Why are we always doubting? We need to just be open to the experience of the Spirit in our life to understand what it means to be born again. And if that is first, that accepting the cure is important. And I'm not suggesting that we don't learn or question or read the Bible or go to Bible studies. That's all part of our faith. But in the end, we can debate it to death. Sometimes we just need to be open to the Spirit of God because the wind blows where it will. You know, one of the reasons that national news media is fascinated with the dust storms we have here in the valley, with the haboobs that come in, is because when those towering dust clouds come in, it makes for a great picture. But you know, one of the last things that we as human beings cannot control is the weather. And so the reality is they'll use this as a lead-in to their national news stories because it's something that's fascinating. It's something we can't explain. And the same is true of the Holy Spirit. So quit debating, quit doubting, and just experience that. Ask God to be in your life. And then secondly, understand this, that there is a mystery to our faith and our life and the power of the Holy Spirit. There is a mystery to redemption. And we need to be okay with that, because we aren't always going to have all the answers. That's why it's called faith. I learned about the power of the Holy Spirit coming in a mysterious way and the wind blowing where it will in a previous church, with a couple that had come to me pretty much having made up their mind to get a divorce. And many times, once people have decided that, they come to the pastor just for some kind of blessing or approval or something else. But I challenged them. And I said, you know, in your wedding vows, you made a promise, for better, for worse. So go to the therapist, go to the counselor, do the hard work. They did that. Nothing seemed to work. They came back. They said, Pastor, what do we do now? I said, I'm just going to ask you to take 60 days to pray that God can work in your life and in your marriage. And to be honest, they kind of disappeared. They didn't come to worship for the next couple months. I thought it was all over and that I'd get a courtesy phone call someday or something announcing that they had divorced. But out about day 45, the wife called me and said, Pastor, I can't explain it. There's still a lot of work to do, but things are better. Things are better because we ask God to be a part of our lives. There's still a lot of work to do, but God is with us. I think that can be your statement and my statement, right? About all of our lives, the ins and the outs, the ups and the downs, the valleys and the mountaintops. There's still a lot of work to do for all of us, but God is with us. And if you don't want to change anything in your life, and if you don't want God to mess with you in your life, and you believe you can just tinker with your life, and that you have control of it, then you go right ahead. But the biblical witness is this. Remember the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and Jesus told him what he had to do? The gospel said he went away sad because he was not willing to do what Jesus asked. The wind blows where it will. Where does the wind need to blow in your life? A word of promise, a word of comfort, a word of hope, a challenge, a problem, a situation. Are you born again? Amen.